You can have it if you
Okay, let's now that we're all brain dead and confused,
best time to make policy.
that's a good time to make policy. Let me just start off by trying to frame where we are by going to where the PowerPoint had the hierarchy examples. And I think it's a good starting point, but I don't think it's a final place. And I think we heard some things today that we probably need to consider and include, and I think we need some more information. There's been suggestions of hiring a consultant. I could entertain that idea. I certainly am not an expert on this. I think we need to set our policies to the best level that we can so that we don't end up having to fight them or fight other people over them in the future. That seemed to be the case sometime. But do we need any other backup information from staff before we can really get our teeth into a policy thing? I'm asking the commission. It's not on the board up there. The hierarchy examples that were listed on this sheet was to start additional telecommunication facilities on existing buildings or existing structures. So can we start by trying to improve our service with existing facilities and existing structures? That's number one. Second, can we, secondly, try to use the public right-of-way, existing power poles or whatever? Third, can we use town property? Fourth is increase antenna height on existing buildings. Would that help? Fifth is tower or similar structure with a maximum height in limited locations. I mean, those, as I say, are kind of starts to say, okay, here's some things we can start talking about. Are there additional things we want to add in there? I think Gene Gillespie's information sounds wonderful. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to do anything? But what does that really mean? Is it realistic to think that the solution will happen without us doing anything? And when will that happen? So can we get more information on that from whatever reliable source that we can? We've heard a lot from a lot of people. I'm going to get to everybody. I'm going to talk a minute first.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk much longer. But anyway, I'm just saying, I don't think I have everything I need to start making policy today. But I have a start with this set of examples, and I'd like to hear if anybody has any more. So let's start down there with Terry Gans, and then I'll take Lynn Larson next, and then...
Thank you. I don't have any current examples I'm looking for, but going back to what I think the Vice Mayor had said and other people have echoed, should we start with what is our goal? As if no application was rumored, if there weren't signs that say no cell tower. What is it we want as a goal for Longboat Key? Do we have a goal? Do we have a care about cell service and Wi-Fi delivery on this island as an amenity and as a necessity? And it may be that's the starting point before all these hierarchical things come into play.
Is there anybody on this panel that doesn't think we need telecommunication service on the key, good telecommunication? Now the question is, do we have and where do we have it, and can we fulfill all of those things? But is there anybody here who, raise your hand if you think we don't need to do anything?
You're the only one keeps raising your hand.
I think we have a problem, and
Okay, so we recognize we have We have a problem, and we would like to find a solution, but we want to find a solution that's not in somebody's face if we can. Ms. Larson?
There's a power
I'd like to create a resolution to the problem that doesn't create another problem for someone else, okay? So that, would be the best of both
It's
worlds.
easy for you to say.
Yes, so, but we do have a problem, and I don't see that it's going to get better in the foreseeable near future. If it was gonna get cured over 6 months' time, it would have been cured over the last 2 years we've been talking about it. So that's the problem that I have right now, is number one, we need to resolve it, and we need to establish a time frame. And I understand the hierarchy thing, but we need to establish a time frame that we're going to stop talking and actually take some type of action.
Okay, let me, and I understand what you're saying, but let me toss something else in here. The town staff has tossed out these 5 things. Is there anything on there you think is wrong or not usable? We have to give staff some direction to be able to work on this. We got Commissioner Zuntz next,
Okay.
and then Commissioner Brenner,
Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor, whatever. He is a commissioner.
On the idea of the using town property for telecommunication facilities, the way Longboat Key developed, we have residential next to commercial next to, everything is sort of mashed together. And I wonder if one of the things we could do is eliminate certain properties for the use of telecommunication services. And whether we need to take a look at that, whether that would make a difference. The other point I'd like to make is it seems to be a myth to some people that the only problems we have on the island are within some people's houses. That absolutely isn't true. The people who did the study went up and down streets. They didn't go in anybody's houses. And we have 3 miles on the north end and a couple miles on the south end that show that there is poor service. And the island is only 11 miles long. So what does that leave you with? It is not a myth that we have a problem, and we need to accept that. And if we don't accept that, we can go through all of this and nothing's going to happen.
We have Vice Mayor Brenner is next, and then Commissioner Duncan, and then Commissioner Younger.
Yeah, excuse me. If you're going to start with what the staff recommended, I'd go back 1 page. Maybe you can't do that, but James, the thing that says staff recommendation.
Yeah.
And the little bullet point under the heading says hierarchy places incumbency on the permanent applicant to prove they are proposing the best option for the town. Now, I think we ought to try to define, what do we mean by the best option? That was my goal. Pick whatever set of words. Because you can't ask an applicant, well, you can, but realistically, you can't ask an applicant to do something without telling them what you're trying to do. And I think we ought to spend whatever time we're going to take on defining what the best option is. And then the others are sort of basic. You ought to use an expert consultant. We don't want to break the law. And then you can go these other hierarchical things. And I think the staff would then have a better feeling as to where they're headed, because we've helped define for them what the goal is all about. End of comment.
I just want to digress on one point that I'd like to see done in conjunction with everything else that we're going to do now, so that it's happening behind the scenes, but it is happening. And I hate to admit it, Gene, but I actually agreed with you on something today in a big way. There is no doubt in my mind that there is a 4G transformation going on in this country and on Longboat Key and everywhere else. If you turn on your television and listen to the ads, you know that we're moving over to 4G. It's happening, okay? So Gene, I think you're correct about that. Secondly, 4G requires 4G antenna. That's why when this whole thing started, they said, gee, I have a 4G phone, but it didn't help anything. Well, it didn't help anything because you didn't have a 4G antenna giving you signal. So that is happening. The providers are doing it. They're not selling all these phones without putting up antennas. So I would disagree with Commissioner Larson in the sense that she said what's going to happen in the next 6 months couldn't affect anything because it hasn't happened in the last 2 years. I think it actually could. And I think it's incumbent upon staff to really dig into this issue and find out what the 4G issue is, whether new antennas with 4G signal are going to actually improve signal strength throughout the island or not. We may find out that they're going to be limited to just the south end again. We don't know that, okay? But let's at least dig into that and see whether there's some sense of improvement there that we can count on. I mean, truthfully, I would hate to spend money on any other system to find out that it gets overcome by 4G and it solves all our problems, and we're all going, oh my God, we just spent X on this. So I think while we do whatever we do here, I don't think we make the assumption that it's going to get better. I think we, again, to commend Commissioner Larson, I think we do move forward with aggression on other solutions now. In the meantime, we are looking in conjunction with those efforts to find out whether this has got any viability or not, this whole issue of 4G and 4G signaling.
Commissioner Younger.
I agree with Commissioner Duncan, and I also recognize and agree with Commissioners Zuns and Larson to extent, yes, there are problems. It's the extent of the problems is something that we're not too sure. If we're rating everything on the dB levels that are measured, and the dB levels that show poor service are at one level on the reports and the studies that we've got, and they're at a higher level, as Mr. Monroe had said before, and what he has said proves to be an acceptable standard, then we don't have the problems that it appears to be on the studies. So there is a little bit of question. That doesn't mean there aren't problems, but it does go back to the magnitude of the problems. And we talk about the south end. The study kind of indicates that there. Nobody's talking about putting a cell tower on the south end. There are buildings there, there are towers there, and of course they certainly need to be addressed, and that's in line with what the staff recommendations in the hierarchy point out.
I live on the south end, and I have neighbors on the south end who have to go outside of their house to use their service, or, you know, it's like sometimes they don't have any service. And I can tell you, I have AT&T, and my husband has the 3G phone, not the 4G. Wouldn't matter if he had the 4G here or not. But we cannot get service with AT&T in this here, or halfway down the golf course, I can't get service going south. So it's not just a north end problem. And what I would like to see is recommendations for improving it and, you know, increasing the height of the antenna. That sounds like something that could be done with very little impact as far as I'm concerned. But I think there's a problem here. I think as long as I have cell service and it's you who doesn't have cell service, maybe it's not a problem, okay? So it's like, that's not the way we should do things.
No. And well, I agree with everything everybody's saying. The problem is, we're not trying to find a solution. We're trying to develop a set of policies so that we can review someone's application for solving the problem for us. And so that's what we need to focus on, and how do we achieve that? Now, I would like to know if staff can come back to us with either a recommendation for a consultant or someone who can help us frame these policy questions so that we can then decide what, as a town, what we want to do. Commissioner Younger.
I would suggest before we consider getting a consultant, because that's when we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and the details, that it might be in our best interest to go down the hierarchies and see if we are in agreement with the general concept. That's not a detailed procedure. It provides a framework for a consultant or anybody else as we choose to move forward.
Well, that's the reason I started with that. And I basically agree that these are a pretty good start. Do you have, that's the reason I asked. If you have a problem with one of them, let me know.
I don't have a problem with them. I think that maybe they're out of order or something.
Well, that's the problem. So you suggesting some other order?
Well, I think that, additional telecommunication facilities, I think increasing the antenna height might be something before you put additional telecommunication things on a building. Maybe you could increase the antenna height by 10 feet before you put an additional one on another building. And I would think that the use of town property would go before you go into the right-of-way, because town property is limited and right-of-way extends the entire length of the key.
Right. Some of these issues, for instance, increasing the antenna height on an existing building, that doesn't work on the north end because we don't have any antenna
I
on
understand
existing
that.
buildings on the north end.
Right.
But what we're looking for is a set of priorities or hierarchies that someone who wants to make an application for a solution, whether it be a tower or DAS or what's it called, light cube or whatever, they need to go through this hierarchy. And if they say, I can't do the first one, and they've got to show why they can't do the first one, and I can't do the second one, they've got to show why they can't do the second one, and so forth and so on, with substantial evidence why they can't do it before they work to what probably is the last resort that we really want, and that's a tower. Commissioner Younger.
I agree with Commissioner Larson on flipping 3 and 4. The part of the problem with this is the north end has no buildings of significant height. Closest thing up there right now is Grand Mariner. They have a height of about 50 feet on their parapet, 49 feet or 50 feet. With the present code, they could put an antenna up 10 feet to bring it to, say, 60 feet. Well, some of the studies have shown a 65 to 70 foot limit would provide the additional coverage. So you'd need at least an additional 20, maybe 25 feet if Grand Mariner were amenable to putting towers on top of their building, which I would say for them is quite a bit better than the tower that they're in opposition to. As far as using the right-of-way with the height limits, that seems to be preferable over the other two to me, because it does imply a different type of communication system, and it does keep the units down at a lower level. So it has less of an intrusive effect and probably would have absolute minimum, if any, effect on property values. And I think that property values is something that we truly have to consider very deeply on this.
Okay. Commissioner Gantz and then Commissioner Compton.
If we're addressing the hierarchy as a possible solution or approach on an application, it seems to me that we can't presume an applicant would have any control over towers on other buildings. I mean, it's good as an overall kind of way the town wants to go, but I don't know how we apply that to an applicant. And also, in this, was there are we asking people to demonstrate that there's a need for these, or is that assumed in the best solution for the town?
Well, I assume that you demonstrate that there's a need. Mr. Manager, would you like to jump in here since you helped put this together?
Yeah, I think that to the extent, I haven't really heard anyone object to the TE report in terms of its quantification. The scale may be subject to dispute, but its quantification of the signal, everyone seems to agree with that. So I think that establishes the baseline. And there is lesser coverage in certain areas than other areas. So whatever word you put on that to define it is something I think we can help you with. As to working down the hierarchy, and let me use an example that Commissioner Gans brought up. How would additional antennas on another facility or even higher ones work? Well, it doesn't work in some areas, but it might work in other areas. The example that Commissioner Larson just mentioned of coverage in the south end is right in the area that was identified as not having very good coverage with certain carriers. And so, you know, they have an option there if they want to do something to enhance their coverage in that area. If we adopted this, the first thing we'd ask is, can you use an existing structure? And that would be the first question they would have to get by in order to move down the hierarchy.
But if the applicant is, for want of a better term, a spec tower developer,
Right.
how does that help us?
Well, remember, if you adopt this hierarchy into your code, it doesn't matter who the applicant is. When they come in for land use, they have to demonstrate that they have already proven number one is not an acceptable alternative. They cannot provide, remember, it's a service that we're looking for, not a facility.
Fine. Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, number 5, I'm not sure what tower or similar structure with a maximum height and limited locations. What does that mean? We've heard heights today. I heard 200 feet, I've heard 150 feet, I heard 85 feet, I've heard 100 feet a few times. I'm not sure what the maximum number is and what exactly that means in this particular point of hierarchy.
It will eventually come to a decision by this commission, that you will eventually say, here's a maximum height that we will allow, if you adopt that approach.
So acceptable maximum height.
Well, yes, a maximum height that gets 4 votes.
So 4-vote maximum, yeah.
Yes.
And in conjunction that, relative to tower or similar structure, we could also say that in an order of hierarchy, structures such as the lighthouse, but we're going to have to change the height allowances for certain things to do that. Structures such as a lighthouse or a Caroline or a camouflaged tower. I mean, this is when you're getting down to the end and you haven't been able to, you've dropped to that level of hierarchy. So we've got some levels of hierarchy even down on item 5 and A, B, and C, if you would. And D with height.
Right. You know, our current policy requires a stealth tower only. Basically, I don't know what you call the other structures.
Camouflage.
No, but I mean, when you say camouflage, I think of like one of the trees that Mr. Monroe showed. I moved here from Mount Vernon, Virginia, and lived on part of what was the estate of Mount Vernon, Washington's home. And one day I was driving into work in the wintertime, and for the first time I noticed this big pine tree right in front of the mansion. And it was because the oak leaves had finally fallen off that I noticed this tree, and they had a stealth tower right in the front of the Mount Vernon's home. And quite frankly, you never see it unless it was the wintertime like that. And even then, I mean, it was an ugly pine tree, but it was a pine tree.
So should we wait for it to snow here?
Have you seen that, Larry?
No, it must have been well camouflaged.
You have to look. You really have to know it's there.
On the riverside?
Yeah, if you're coming, my home was a little south and west, and when I got to the circle, when you're facing east on the circle, it's straight in front of the house. Go ahead, Mayor.
Jim, just to verify your point, and I think David can attest to this, being from the Philadelphia area, if you go to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, eastern